the Almost Perfect Podcast.
Welcome to the Almost Perfect Podcast, a celebration of fuck-ups, failures, and falling flat on your face. This is a podcast that believes you can learn from experience, but that experience doesn't have to be your own. Hi, I'm Bob Perfect, and I'm a functional fuck-up. Let's learn from somebody else's mistakes, and today we're learning from Russel Hlongwane. Now, Russel is a cultural producer and a creative industry consultant, which basically means he's got his fingers in many different pies behind the scenes in the creative and cultural industries and societies here in Durban and South Africa. He's pretty instrumental behind the scenes in a lot of different things. He connects a lot of different people together, has a lot of different conversations, shares lots of ideas, gets lots of different projects going, and we get into a lot of it on this podcast. Now, Russel is someone who, I love chatting to. We've had countless conversations over the years, over the last, not that many years, probably the last 5 years or so, since he's only really been in his role in the arts in the last 5 years. So, yeah, we've had lots of conversations. They always go on forever. I'm always leaving going, damn, I didn't think about that. Or, wow, I should think about that more. And I think this conversation is going to leave a few of you going, and doing the same thing. You're going to be sitting and going, oh, wow, I'd never thought of that. So I'm hoping, you learn a lot from this podcast. I know I did. We get into a wide range of topics from, culture to design to race. I'm obviously an ignorant ass white boy at times in this podcast, but thankfully Russel is patient and he explains, a lot of different concepts on this podcast that maybe I didn't know before and maybe you don't know before, because you might also be an ignorant ass white boy. So be prepared to learn a little bit from that. But if you're not an ignorant ass white boy, you might be like, come on, Bob, that was a little bit ignorant. So, just a heads up there, owning up to it ahead of the time. But maybe it's not as bad as I think. Probably not. But what I'm trying to say is it's an honest conversation between two people who discuss race quite a lot in this conversation. But we also do get into lots of different things. Like I say, design factors heavily into Russell's life. And he actually really enjoys tension, which is something we talk about. Tension in his own life, tension in society, and what comes out of it. Not necessarily the good, not necessarily the bad, but just, what comes out of all these different things. He's very fascinated with a lot of interesting topics, so a lot of them come up in this conversation. So yeah, you're going to get to know Russel Hlongwane. I know a lot of you listening to this have probably seen him around. You probably had one or two conversations with him, and you don't know his history. I didn't know his history, and now I do. I know a little bit about it. I know enough to get a bit more context about who he is. So yeah, we're going to get to know Russel in just a little bit, but I've got to let you know that I am giving away 2 comic books. Yes, 2 comic books on this podcast this month. You've got 2 more days to enter. So the 31st of October, midnight, that is the cutoff date. The comic books are Abacat and His Guac Rocket by Tasman Nadu and Sunday's Slave by Billy Pineapples, who's also known as Luke Mulver. Luke Mulver is his real name, but I've always known him by his stage name, so that's why I said Billy Pineapples. But no, he's now a real artist, Luke Mulver, and I've done podcasts with both of them, so go and check that out. Tasman Nadu, Luke Mulver, just go check in the archives there. Really great conversations with both of them, mostly about comics and pop culture and all of those sorts of things. And yeah, I'm giving away, like I said, Luke's Sunday Slave and Tasman's Abacat and His Guac Rocket. And to win, what you got to do is you got to go to iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whichever one you use. I don't know why you can use both. I don't know why it has different things. Whatever, fuck it, simplify life, whatever their fucking motto bullshit is. But yeah, basically you go there, leave a review. That's it, simple. Just a review. Say, hey, this podcast is dope, or this podcast is okay. Whatever. Just leave a review there. Take a screenshot of that and email that to me. It's almostperfectpod@gmail.com. Simple. You're entered in. If you don't want to go through all that motion, then just sign up to the Patreon. Because if you're a patron on the Patreon at patreon.com/almostperfect, then you don't have to do any of that. You get entered into the competition automatically. You get entered into most of the competitions automatically. So that's just something to think about. If maybe you want to support the podcast, then you can go over there. There's a few extra benefits like being able to suggest guests, ask questions, and a few other things. Just go to there and you can take a look at what's on offer there, and you can also help support the podcast by doing that. Other than that, Facebook, the Almost Perfect Podcast, Twitter, almost_podcast, Instagram, Almost Perfect Podcast, and email almostperfectpod@gmail.com. I'd actually like to read emails and stuff out on this podcast. Maybe that could be a thing if anyone ever sends me an email. So that's your cue, people. That's your cue. Send me an email to almostperfectpod@gmail.com, and there's a good chance I might read it out at the beginning of one of these podcasts. So that's that. I think that's everything I need to let you know. Don't have much else going on in my life at the moment. Things are a little bit quiet, and I like it that way. So without further ado, here comes the Almost Perfect Podcast with Russel Hlongwane. So how are you living, Russell?
Yeah, I'm living good. I'm swimming against and with the tide.
Swimming against and with the tide.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Some days it's with the tide, like you swim out and then like you're catching the rip current, and then other days
I just miss it completely.
I feel you.
Yeah. No, it's very like I'm working in a very fast-paced and robust moment or time. Some weeks are absolutely and brutally busy, and other weeks are much slower. But I'm also shifting between very different roles because the projects I'm working on, kind of some are like very cerebral, others are kind of very like passive, and mundane. It's important, so sometimes it's difficult to like switch between both of those roles in a seamless and smooth way.
Yeah, you're someone who I've always seen as like both like a creative and an admin type. Like you've always been doing like things like in the creative community, but that so many creatives like don't even know exist essentially. Like, like the more bureaucratic side, the more like admin-y side of things. Like, do you find like you just got a more natural affinity towards that and just a natural ability towards it?
I mean, the best of admin people will probably tell you that I suck.
When it comes to admin. So it's just us creatives who look at you and go, wow,
this guy's got it sorted.
He's killing the game. He's so professional at everything.
I think it has to do with my training. I mean, I'm trained in international trade.
Okay.
And I worked for 7 years for a very big corporate company.
Okay.
Corporate firm. And so, I'm quite a fait and very familiar with processes, administration, the importance of administration, of systems, etc., etc. So I kind of have that skill that I utilize, and I think it serves me well in the nature of the spaces that I operate in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I didn't really realize you had come from a corporate environment, because I've known you for years now. Like, mostly from your work with the KZNSA and then other projects that you picked up. Like over the years, we worked together a few different times. Yeah. But I didn't really realize you had started out in corporate.
Sure, yeah. I worked for a shipping company, for the fourth biggest shipping company in the world. I trained in international trade, in dry cargo operations.
Okay, the dry cargo operations doesn't make sense. The international trade, considering what you do, like totally makes sense. But the dry cargo operations, I was not expecting that.
Well, it's about leasing in and leasing out of ships, basically. Okay. Yeah, kind of all the contractual, operational aspects that are part of that trade or the operation. I studied this institutes in London. I did a few internships in Durban during that time, and then I was offered a position at this big company. And I spent 7 years in the sales department and in the operations departments.
Oh, it's nice. So you could learn a lot from both sides of the thing there, because sales, you actually had to do sales.
Yeah.
So you gotta. What's that like though? Like so what exactly are you selling?
You're selling space on the
space
ship,
on the
essentially.
ship.
Yeah.
So you're busy just calling people and being like, "Yo, do you need to ship this something like
Yeah.
next week? Because I've got a prime spot for you."
I mean, it's that nightmare has served me really well in the space that I operate in now, because I mean, in sales you've got weekly targets, you've got monthly targets,
Yeah.
biannual and annual targets, you know, and you've got to make a plan. You know, the deadline is approaching. You haven't sold enough space. You've got to, and so as a result, you learn very, very quickly to develop relationships, to tend to relationships. You also learn to strategize, to forecast, kind of know how to pull cards from different places, you know, when necessary and when required, but you also learn how to like upgrade people, you know.
Okay.
So like, you know there's a client who's shipping an X amount every week or every fortnight or whatever.
So if you got a bit of extra space, you can give it to them.
Yeah, or you can say to them, look, you know, I noticed that you are shipping so much at this rate or at this frequency, so I can reserve an X amount of shipping rates for you if you can guarantee this amount of cargo for me, you know, at this.
And so that obviously helps you reach your targets long
Totally,
term, because
yeah.
you just want to have that. Yeah, your
security.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you get to a point where you have such regular business that you're not stressing about meeting the target, but it's more about maintaining the quality of the clientele.
Yeah, making sure that they're happy. I guess that's like with almost, well, they're happy and you're happy with them.
Yeah, but I think it's also thinking about like, how do I maximize this customer revenue?
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we bleed them dry?
Yes. Yeah, but I think it's also, it moves like I think I could never succeed in that world because it's so brutal,
Yeah.
you know. But for me it was about like, how do I make concessions with this client? How do I provide them with what they need, but also like kind of give them what they want?
Yeah.
The luxuries and the bells and the whistles, you know.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, this is good for any business, you know, any entrepreneur, whatever. You want to make your customers happy, because then they stick with you for longer. It's basic, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's
but some clients, I can imagine, would try and negotiate hard with you, try and lean on you hard. They'll go, oh, they're giving me something, so now I'm gonna take as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Because they're also handling business. They're trying to
Totally.
get the best rates they can possibly get.
Exactly, man. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you've put it in a very perfect and succinct way. But I think like, I mean, I learned in that time that people do business with people that they like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most base level, like, that's how things have gone for like the last 100 years, like, at least, like, you know, nepotism's been the thing.
Exactly.
And it always will be. I mean, just look at, you know, how anyone does anything. Like, just look at the creative industry. Like, people get put on purely because they know the right person.
Totally.
Like, and people get upset about that because they're like, you know, it should be merit-based and this and that. And yes, it should, but also, a lot of people have the same merits.
Exactly. So what differentiates you?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally,
Unfortunately, like, so, but also the thing is, if you do surround yourself with those people, like, inevitably do cool shit that, like, you know, you can also get involved with.
Yeah.
Like,
word.
which, like, I found to be, like, the cool thing about the creative industry is, like, you know, as I've grown older within this industry, like, there's always access to cool things to do.
Yeah.
Like, because everyone's got something going on. Someone that you know always has a cool project that's like you can get involved in.
Yeah.
And you're one of those people who seems to like always be involved in a project at some point in time. How did you move on from the corporate world to the art world?
I've always been. It's a big answer that I'll give, or a long one, but my introduction into the arts world is through hip hop, essentially, right?
Yes.
I started out as an MC and got involved with mixtapes and organizing shows from the Bat Center.
Did you ever do raps like about, you know, corporate shipping?
Did I? Nah. Have I? No, I've
one
never.
day the ship's gonna come in.
What's the ETA? What may I say? No,
And
I
also
didn't.
it's cool they're doing shows at the Bat Center, and then also like
Yeah, it's like overlooking the ships. I mean, at times, right? So like, I know that a ship is arriving on Saturday at like 5 p.m.
And
and I'd see the bugger coming across.
and you're there like for a rap show. That's dope, man.
It's kind of schizophrenic, but yeah, I guess.
So yeah, so rap was your introduction, hip hop was your introduction to the arts world in general.
Yeah, and so we organized mixtapes, and I was at that point, I think quite early, I realized that I'm a good organizer. I can bring people. I've got the ability to bring people together, to bring multiple kind of people who come from very different backgrounds and think in very different ways, and I kind of
You've got the temperament to deal with those personalities as well.
I try to develop it, yeah. And so over those times, a lot of people kind of called me or invited me to assist in different on projects. So being Durban, the creative community is really small.
Yeah.
Kind of people bleed across spaces. So we organized, we formed some work with Sihle and Tembu, for example.
Sweet,
That's my friend. We did like.
I think he did Born to Kwaito. I need to.
Yes.
I need to get him on, yeah.
Yeah. So we organized like film marathons, and we were working on online magazines. Just like trying to get shit out there.
Trying to create stuff. Trying to like create like a little scene, create a bit of buzz like within
Durban. Yeah, and so that role kind of has grown or evolved over time, and around about that same period, a rather big project, a research-based project, was coming into Durban. They kind of invited me to that, and there was a UIA that was also coming into the city around about the same time. So I managed to get myself onto that project. So those two projects kind of.
That wasn't that long ago. That was like 2012, wasn't it?
2014.
Oh, okay, 2014.
Yeah, 2014, yeah.
Damn,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yep.
Wow, it's only been like 5-6 years or so that
Yes,
you've been
full time in the arts, yeah. But I mean, from as a hobby, as an active hobby, perhaps I would say since 2003.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like I always saw you around, I always like, well not always, but often saw you around, and had an understanding. Okay, I'm just gonna wait for the
cops, the ambulance.
Yeah. I always had an understanding of like who I thought you were and stuff, but like I had no clue that like I was always just like, you must have been like a book nerd at school, and like that's why you became like afterwards, like I thought you probably studied something in the arts, but like with the admin side of it, and like because of like your forecasting side of things, like you are good like when it comes to trending stuff and cultural, like
you think so?
Well, coming up with picking like noticing what is culturally relevant has been something you've been pretty good with. Like you tend to like work with the people who are doing the cool things, not like the cool things in terms of the popular public stuff, but in terms of the underground and in terms of
yeah. I mean, I guess I wouldn't confidently kind of own that. I think most of the time I'm like quite off mark.
Really?
Yeah, and maybe it's something that I'm much more aware of now because I realize that I'm not as young anymore.
Dude, so that's been a big problem for me because like for a little while, like I did make some money as a youth culture analyst.
Sure.
And now I'm like, fuck it. Like I'm not. Like what can I say? I'm not a part of this. Yeah. I'm not. Like, and I can look at trends and stuff like that, but it's a different thing when you're on the streets and you're living it. It's a different thing like when you're actually a part of the communities and you can go, well, of course this is what's popping.
Sure, exactly.
Like when you get a bit older and you're looking at these trends from online and you're looking at it from the window of your penthouse apartment life's doing well for you now,
it's at a distance. Yeah,
I think there's a bit more of a disconnect there.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you in the sense that perhaps one could say that I'm in circles, I'm in networks that are doing work that is sort of significant in some way, in the sense that they are contributing quite significantly to the cultural discourse.
Yeah.
You know, in the country. So I understand what you mean from that perspective. You know, but yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm really out of tune in terms of like popular culture in that way. You know.
Like popular culture, so like mainstream popular culture.
Mainstream popular culture,
Because
yeah.
like I say though, in terms of the art world, in terms of like music as we understand it and that, like you do know typically what's going on. Like the fresh stuff might take a little longer to get to.
Sure, yeah.
But you do have an understanding of like, you know, who's
I know
who,
the names.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know the names, but you know what, Bob? It sounds like I'm trying to be too cool for Durban or too cool for like whatever's happening, but because my interests are spread so wide and broad, it's difficult for me to know what's happening in every space.
Of course.
At that current moment.
Of course, but you'll know people who know.
Yeah, word, of course. Like I know Bob who knows. You know what I mean?
I don't know anymore. I don't know anything anymore. But I used to know some things. like we were saying. But actually, we're pretty far into this now, I guess, and we haven't really discussed what it is that you do. What do you do?
I get that question a lot. So my work my work exists in two strands. On the one side, I'm a cultural producer, which means that I operate as a curator, a writer, cultural theory. I'm interested in design. I'm interested in a very particular kind of media. I'm interested in futurity. You know, kind of the more artistic, kind of left field stuff. That's my cultural production side. And then on the other hand, the other strand is my kind of consultancy work, if you will. So this is working with organizations and institutions in the cultural space or in the entrepreneurial space, kind of working with cultural entrepreneurs, strategy for cultural organizations, research around the creative economy, kind of working on programs that supports creatives or creative entrepreneurs. That's the stuff that pays the bills most of the time, yeah.
Okay.
But those two.
So
are
I guess how you just
complementary.
get to be consultants. You do all those things. You're just like, I'm a consultant.
No, I mean no. I call myself a cultural producer and a
And
creative industries consultant.
consultant,
Yeah. So those are the two strands, and I'm kind of straddling both of those.
How do you find the time, man? Like, that's a lot. Or is it just different projects at different times? Like,
It's a lot. It's a lot, an awful lot of work. You make the time, man. You make the time. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a easy or a logical answer to that. And just like shit lands up on your lap, man, and you gotta make it happen.
I mean, you can always just say no to some things. You can always, you know, go, I'll do this at another time, or like, this project. Like, you know, obviously those questions have to come in of like, can I do this project, or can I do this project now, or, you know, can I do it later on? Like, and obviously working with different people, they might not necessarily see the same things you see when it comes to picking projects. You
Totally.
know? Like, is that a concern for you?
Yeah, it is. It is now. It is. I would say. I mean, the phase that I've just emerged from had to do with a lot of proving of oneself to the industry or to the network. You know.
Do you think like you really needed to do that, or was it a personal like thing that you felt like you needed to prove? Like, do you think you needed to prove it to them? Because
no, I mean it's in that.
like
It's both.
because your name's had like, you know, cachet of sorts for a while now.
Sure, but you I mean, and perhaps I should contextualize this. I think you have ideas and you talk about those ideas for long enough, and people are interested and people are attracted
But you
to
need
those
to actually
ideas.
implement
But you have
them.
to deliver.
Okay.
You know?
And so the last year or so has been implementing a lot of ideas.
I'd say kind of 2015 to 2017 has been about kind of manifesting and demonstrating the ideas that I had for myself first and foremost, you know, but for other people to kind of see what those thoughts are, you know. So that proving oneself to people in the network or people that are interested in your ideas is important. I don't think I do it primarily to impress or to prove to people. I do it for myself because I'm interested and I gravitate towards that stuff. But you know, there is the as a consequence, people get to see what and how you're thinking about stuff.
What sort of projects like have you done in the last 2 years that you would be talking about in this instance?
Oh man. This is implicating.
Not anything. Okay, you don't have to go with anything that, or just the type of projects. Like,
sure.
you know, like, because, like, I'm just trying to like give people an understanding of the kind of stuff you work on.
So look, man. In the range of titles and areas of interest that I've mentioned, I enter all of them through the position of black folk.
Okay.
You know, so I'm interested in design and how design intersects with black folk, black subjectivity. I'm interested in futurity and where black people find themselves in the context of futurity. I'm interested in media in relation to black folk, so on and so on and so forth.
Do you find that a lot of that work hasn't been done? Like, I mean, a lot of it has, but do you think there's still a lot of work to be done in those spaces? So, like, that's why you're there.
Yeah, a lot, man. An awful lot. I think it's been done in spaces that are very. I mean, I also operate in a niche context, so I'm very mindful of that. But I think it's been done in like academic spaces.
Yes.
Or it's been done. I think, and it's sometimes been done in very crass ways in the mainstream, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps what I'm trying to do is to complicate it, with some kind of aesthetic appeal.
Okay.
You know, and I don't think there's been enough of that kind of work being done.
And also, obviously, not the generic, you know, Western ideology of African aesthetics, like in terms of that aesthetic appeal, because that, like you're saying, like when it comes to even these sorts of projects, I'm sure there's like some Western influence in terms of the funding, in terms of.
Sure, you can't deny that. Yeah.
Yeah.
My own sensibility is informed from and by a Western perspective. You know, can't avoid that. But I think it's trying to find a creative tension between kind of indigeneity and these concepts that have been imposed upon us, but also that we've inherited. And so,
like the way you put that, yeah.
Sure. And so I mean maybe if I foreground one project that I just wrapped up, or at least in the process of wrapping up, was called Umongo Wedolopa, which loosely translates to the marrow of the city. And what I was trying to do is to chart a history of black folk in Durban as a city, right? So this is kind of casting our eye back to the first black bodies that arrive in the city as cheap labor, right? And kind of moving a few generations to this moment where people like myself and my peers and my friends and my network are making decisions on the city, right? And so when one kind of reads urban studies or urban theory from a South African perspective, much of it kind of starts around apartheid moving forward.
Yeah, it's like the 30s moving forward, when it's really from like the late 1800s.
You know what I mean?
You're looking at stuff.
Yeah, but also when
even earlier.
Well, I mean, but if you look at Durban as a city, it's perhaps around those
late
times,
1800s.
right? But there aren't a lot of black names that are part of that history and part of that reading.
No, I mean, there's more statues of Dickens. Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You know, Shaka. It's changing slowly. It's changing. But yeah,
but a bit too slow. So the project was trying to kind of look at ways in which my grandparents would talk about the city, would storytell of the city or about the city, and I was trying to kind of dig up all of those kind of narratives, those natural or organic narratives, and place them alongside kind of urban theory, urban studies, academic discourse about placemaking and city making, you know.
So what do you mean by that? So taking their stories and reinterpreting them through these theories, or
challenging the other using the other. So
Okay.
so for example, one of the ideas that I was interested in is the idea of the flaneur, which is it's a term that comes from the situationist movement and kind of even before, which was basically a critique of Paris. It was a critique of Paris and the way in which Paris was growing and kind of capitalism taking over, yeah? And like these are a bunch of philosophers and artists that were kind of using the medium of walking as a way to kind of feel the temperament of a city or the temperament of a space, right? Just by walking. So the flaneur is a walker. It's the walking body.
Oh, holy crap! I feel like I'm one of these people and I don't even know about it.
Yeah, no, you are definitely there. You're a flaneur, you know. But I only realized, or at least came across the flaneur much later in my life. But I was a backpacker as an MC.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I know you. You're like how often do we bump into each other on the road?
Exactly
in
right?
random parts of town. Like,
Right?
It's like, yeah.
But that's at least for me, it's my way of study.
Yeah.
You know, it's my way of studying the city. It's my way of kind of making connections, a reading of the city, if you will. So
Reading of the temperature of, like, of society around you.
Word. I mean, I always say like to drive through the city is one thing. To ride in a city is a different. To walk the city is a completely different.
Yeah.
These are three different ways of engaging with the city at different intimacies, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd taken this idea of the flaneur and I'd use the backpacker as a way for me to kind of enter that conversation of the flaneur.
Okay.
But alongside that, my grandparents would be familiar with ukfesa. Now, ukfesa is a term which describes the situation where someone enters a city and they walk around from factory gates to factory gates looking for a job.
Okay.
For a lot of people who come from the rural areas, this is their initial stab. This is how they're introduced into the city. So their markers, their mapping of the city is completely different to that of a cartographer, for example.
And also just anyone else as well. Like, well, not anyone else. I'm talking about myself, white people, middle class white people, don't go into town necessarily looking for jobs. Or they do, but they're going to very different buildings.
Word. Yeah, totally.
Like, because I was just trying to think, like, because you're describing that experience of, laborers coming from outside of town, like, isn't something, white people have really had to experience.
Word.
Like, so it's like, yeah, like.
Or sometimes, like, even the way in which one approaches a building as a black body is completely different to how a white body perceives it. And as you get closer, there are a number of calculations. There's a schema that society has created for people to be positioned and to be placed in. And so I was trying to kind of look at how do I approach the city, whilst acknowledging that there's this kind of body of knowledge that existed before me that I have to kind of bring into the now, into the moment,
into the public discourse as well.
Yeah, with the kind of like with the design sensibility, with the clash, I guess, of practices, So I kind of developed a really strong graphic language that I used in communicating the project and the work. It was experimental in many ways. It didn't make sense in the sense that, like, if I showed to my grandparents and kind of develop they would deduce a completely different reading of it. But someone who's an urban practitioner would also like be lost because I'm using some language that they're not familiar with, that is not in the textbooks, But then, like, hip hop cats would have a completely different interpretation. And for me, this creative tension, this triangulation, is what I'm trying to work with, because this is where I find myself as a young black male.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that's literally just you, like, like because you, like, as far as I've known you, like, you've taught me so much, like, about, Black African culture in South Africa, just conversations we've had,
Word.
like, I've learned things, like, throwing lightning, I had no clue about throwing lightning
Well,
until
no.
you like explained it to me, and I was like, I've learned so much about it now, like just about, you know, traditional like medicine, you know, when it comes to plants and stuff. That's
Right,
conversations
word,
we've
yeah.
had on that, and it's like, it's really, yeah, dope. But then at the same time, you've got like, you know, this corporate analytical side, and then also this artistic side. You
Sure.
know, this love, like these three, like, and so I can see that you're constantly trying to marry these like three passions of your life,
My
like.
existence, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, I was making this, I was
Sorry.
using this project as a way to demonstrate, you know, the question that you asked around, like, you know, what does it mean when I talk about this creative tension? You
Yeah.
know? So yeah, that's one project, you know. I mean, the other one, is you know, so like this project, the Umongo Edolopa, the mayor of the city, is trying to challenge a kind of Western perspective about placemaking, but at the same time challenge an inverted commas an indigenous position and thought process about placemaking, you know,
Of course.
and converge those two and acknowledge and accept those tensions and those resistance points that occur.
Because that is the reality we live in.
Totally, yeah. Another project I did that with is it's around kind of digital culture. It's called Ifu Elimnyama, which again loosely translates to the dark cloud, and I'm essentially thinking about tech,
Depression? No.
technology.
Okay.
Sorry,
I was gonna go with depression, but okay, no.
no. Well, let's see where this goes. I mean, it
Okay.
might add an interesting dimension.
Because I was
to
just
this.
like dark cloud, like
like, yeah.
But now tech cloud, like yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of using the cloud, the significance of the cloud in Zulu folklore, or perhaps
Okay.
Nguni folklore, if you will. So the dark cloud, right, is like doom and gloom, right? Bad news. And in digital culture, the cloud is a repository, right? So very quickly, to think of the cloud is to think of Namkuburan in Zulu folklore, which is Mother Nature, and it's kind of connected to other dimensions of existence, right? So there's something about the cloud as fertility, there's something about the cloud as kind of the bearer of news, you know?
Okay.
There's something about the cloud as the replenishment of the earth. But there's something that's also stored in the cloud, you know, rain. And one thinks of water and the significance of water and how that kind of permeates life, right? On the other side, one is thinking of the cloud as a storage device, as a repository once again. And so when one looks at where the internet or tech is moving towards, where do black people find themselves in that conversation, in that context, right? Are they active participants or are they passive participants? Or do they enter the same kind of strictures that they find themselves in this world, you know? And so the work kind of takes Zulu folklore, mysticism, and systems of transcendence and places them within a digital framework as a way to complicate how we think and what we think about when we talk about the internet. But also starting to think of technology to think of technology outside the framework of software and hardware, but to acknowledge other forms of technology that have taken place in the so-called global south, you know.
Okay.
Again, like so I use Inkanyamba. Inkanyamba is a snake of kind of big scale, big size. It's somewhat mythical. It's somewhat transcendental, you know.
Okay.
And it exists in different iterations, known as different names across the Nguni culture.
Yeah, I know the name from different stories. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of think of the snake as, so it's said to be accompanied by a cloud and it moves from point A to point B. And so I kind of I place or I situate this narrative in the great ruins of Mapungubwe, around 1210 or so. And so the snake is moving from point A to point B using a GPS, but in its path it loses the connection to the cloud. And so it's kind of in the state of liminality for eons, you know. But a few kind of centuries ago, there's a group of black people who had migrated to the fourth dimension after the great decimation of the black people. And these cats have now got to return because one of the members of the tribe is taking trips to Silicon Valley to fundraise for a digital empire. And of course, one is kind of criticizing and critiquing the privatization of knowledge systems, the way in which people's sort of ontologies and histories are traded in some way or the other on the internet. Long story short, this advanced civilization, this advanced black civilization has to return to deliver a message that will unlock the cloud. Then Inganyamba kind of arrives or makes its way to its destination, but the people also get connected to their ontology and their history, etc., etc.
So it's like reinterpretations, like of old stories and like with new technologies.
Would it be? No, not it's not with new technologies. I think it's trying to challenge.
We're trying to challenge what new technologies are in relation to older.
Well, I'm not doing a very good job of describing this, but I think what I'm doing is to dismiss the idea that technology as we know it is a construction of the West. It's to acknowledge other forms of technology that are much more transcendental and dynamic in their nature.
Okay, I get what you mean. So you don't mean actual, well, yeah, you don't mean like physical technology necessarily.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking about hardware or software. I'm talking about things that we cannot explain, things that science cannot explain. Yet happen.
That's been a big interest in your life, right?
Yeah, word, totally. I mean, this is where my practice kind of finds itself. It's at this intersection. But at the same time, I'm into science. And so I can't dismiss that part of myself.
Well, how do you marry the two?
I don't think one can. Perhaps
Are they a conflict?
Are they at conflicts? Yeah, I think they are at conflicts most times. And I find interest in the conflicts. I find interest in that resistance. Again, it's this productive tension between those two. I'm less interested at the marriage. I'm more interested at the tensions that takes place in the everyday in the marriage. You know what I mean?
Well, I was saying, like, not like a marriage, more like being in a band. Like, where, like, you have to come together, make something, like, out of this thing. Like, you can go home and hate each other. Like,
Yeah, but I think, what I'm trying to do is... What I'm trying to do is to create a stock. Is to stock take, is to create an account, a ledger of information, of stories, of imagination that my grandparents had, and an emerging imagination, and store it somewhere, keep it accessible, because I believe that our generation as black folk has a super importance, or has this responsibility to capture that which we inherited from our grandparents for the generation that comes after us, because if we don't play an active role in doing that information is gone.
Yeah,
for good.
Because the monolith of Western culture, like, is just all absorbing and all encompassing, and does eventually, like, the empire, like, of everything,
sure.
like, it steamrolls culture, like, and like, for culture to continue the way it has, or to grow, or not continue the way it is, to continue to grow, like, to continue to evolve, to continue to change, it does need, it's historians, it does need people actually getting these stories and actually sharing them and taking them forward, because unless they're written down, unless they're recorded, unless they're put in platforms where more people can engage with them,
sure.
Even people of other cultures like myself, so I can learn about stuff like that I should have been taught a long time ago. These things are super, super important to do at the moment. So I agree with you. Like, and I think you're not the only person like who's doing this, which is super dope. Like, do you find like that, like, there is like a cool rise in black consciousness in terms of preservation of culture, in terms of looking at, you're no longer just trying to be modern, but looking at your parents not with disdain, but actually going, there's traditions here that I should take forward? Or do you see a lot of younger black Africans going against that grain? I think there must be a lot of tension there, like, between the you know, modernity and, you know, the city life, and then obviously
Sure, kind of. Yeah, there is a growing consciousness, I would say, of young black folk who are kind of engaging at that intersection at different degrees.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's a group, really interesting collective called Black Studio from Johannesburg, which is a group of architects and urban planners, young.
dope.
Yeah, and they call themselves narrators of space, and they basically kind of in trying to engage in the built environments from a black perspective, you know, using a black imagination to animate and talk about space, you know. There are other cats in visual cultures who are also doing the same work, you know, trying to mask, kind of create some kind of illustrious, you know, demonstration of history of black folk, and place it in the current moments, yet challenge the current moments using history. You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of cats are doing that. And the tensions for me, and as well as for them, I think, is kind of drawing the boundary of what we take into the public domain and what you leave in kind of in enclosed environments because of respect, you know,
Okay.
for what is sacred. And
But
yeah.
then how do those traditions pass on? Like, I mean, they just will, like, because they are sacred and they just passed on between families, between individuals. I mean, because they've made it this far. Like,
Sure. Look, I think they passed on. They passed on to people who need to inherit
they just
them.
don't become general knowledge.
Sorry?
They just don't become general knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And even for people like myself, you know, I think there's a point at which I at many points kind of humble myself and choose not to engage, simply because it's not for my knowledge. You know what I mean? There's a community of practice that circulates that information quite successfully, and I don't have to enter that space.
But it seemed like traditional healing would probably have
One of the many.
its
Yeah,
own, like,
one of the
section of,
many.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's something that comes up a lot, like, in my timeline more and more these days.
Uh-huh.
And I'm endlessly fascinated by it, you know, like people talking about they get the calling, or like, you know, like going and visiting sangomas and stuff, and it's like, I always wonder how that knowledge base gets shared, you know, between sangomas, between, you know, these like communities of people, like how alternative medicine becomes these things, these practices, how they do become passed down if they're not just generally shared amongst everyone, but clearly there are ways for it to be facilitated.
Oh yeah, very established ways. And I mean, I'd even push back on the idea of it being termed alternative medicine. You know?
Yeah,
I mean, it's again, you know, it's not my place to kind of embed myself in that world and try to, you know, unpack it. But I think there's a degree to which I can invite it, I can create dialogue or a conversation with that community, you know, because they could allow me access to certain things. And again, I feel like this moment is kind of very like this, we torn between pro and anti, and look at things from very black or white kind of lens. And perhaps what it's trying to do is create a grey space.
Yeah.
Trying to kind of work at the fault lines, if you will. And so there are, you know, black folk who wouldn't vie in that area of like traditional practice, you know. And I think what I'm trying to do is kind of draw that closer and present it in a way that lures the person who's like completely against it.
Yeah.
But at the same time do that with people on the other end of that spectrum, you know? Yeah.
You've been pretty good, like, not that like I'm completely against or anything like that, but you've been very good at opening my mind up to, you know, a lot of stuff. Like, just the fact that it, like, is other people's lived realities, and there's so much that I don't know about it. Like, you know, like you make these assumptions, like as a Westerner, and also because of what's, like, it's weird to call myself a Westerner.
I was gonna ask you if you consider yourself a Westerner.
Unfortunately so, yeah. Like,
On what grounds?
like, I am, like, you know, I am definitely more, like, of a Western cat than an African cat. Like, I barely understand Zulu, like, you know, like, that's just the primest of prime examples. But, like, I do, obviously, have an affinity towards Africa and African culture and an immense respect and
Word.
you know and a will to understand more, like, essentially about, you know, the people and place that I'm in.
You
Like,
born on the continent?
yes, like I'm South African, but also, like, I hate identity shit in a big way, like, for
Right.
personal stuff. Like,
Sure.
I don't like being a white South African. I like being Bob Perfect, you know, like,
Right.
I don't like, you know, borders in general. I don't
Sure,
like, you know,
yeah,
like,
it's all-
I hate those
yeah.
things. I'm much more of an individualist in those regards, but I also understand how society, like, unfortunately, history hasn't allowed that to happen. It
Sure.
hasn't allowed us all to just be strictly individuals.
Sure.
It's through tribalism, through the way our brains work, we've created, you know, these divides constantly. It's me versus them, like, you know, us versus them, like, and that's the unfortunate thing. So, you know, my cultural upbringing for the most part is Western with heavy African influences.
Okay.
Like, so that would be my cultural identity, I guess. But I struggle with it immensely because it's like, I, you know, within, you know, most white circles, I'm definitely, like, ostracized in a lot of ways for being closer to black culture. Like, you know, throughout my life, that's been the thing where it's like, you know, you're one of those guys. Like,
I see.
and I'm sure you guys get it within the black community, you know, like, black guys who are closer to white people, like, you know,
Word.
get given shit for that, so.
I mean, it's a different kind of shit, maybe, you know. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying, like,
Actually, we don't get it that much, to be honest. I mean, it's also complicated, right? Because I a lot of people would have assumptions about, like, my orientation and my upbringing, you know. Yeah.
what, do they think you're posh and, like,
I mean, you know, there's a tendency to think that I had, like, a Model C kind of privileged upbringing, you know.
nothing
Which
about,
is
like,
not the case.
yeah, nothing about, like, talking to you has ever made me think that. Like, I can understand, like, through the way you talk, maybe people might get that perception. But just from the conversations I've had with you, I can definitely understand that the drive that you have obviously comes from, you know, having to work for everything, having to fight for something, like, having to, like, I don't, like, that's the thing. To me, like, I assumed that you got into trade and stuff because you were probably trying to go, cool, how do I make, like, as much money as I possibly can for now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably one of the few discerning ones, perhaps. And maybe it's because we've had these kind of conversations, you know? But a lot of people would make a set of assumptions, you know? It's like, oh, you probably went to this kind of school, you know, your parents are probably in this bracket, etc., etc.
You know what it is? It's because you're a walker, and I know, like, no one walks, like, you know, grew up with money. Like,
word out.
like, if you grew up with money, you don't walk. Like, that's a broke boy tendency thing. That's
Well, you know, it's also like, I mean, my world is constantly at odds with itself, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, like, the world that I'm part of now is very, very different to the world I grew up in. You know.
well, do you want to talk about the world you grew up in?
Yeah, but I'm not. No, I don't mind talking about it. I mean, so, you know, my grandmother and my mother were both domestic workers. You know, raised by single parents, in very, like, strained conditions. Yeah, like, fucking dirt broke for most part of my childhood into my adulthood. You know, exposed to, like, really grotesque shits at a very early age, that comes with its own baggage, you know, on, like, a young black mind who's trying to formulate an understanding of the world, you know, and kind of out of that drive and out of that desperation and lack of resources and lack of things, I understood quite early on that I have to adjust my gears in a very particular way in order to create some kind of productive and sustainable livelihood, I
Yeah.
guess, for myself, for my parents, and for my siblings, you know. And so the world that I find myself in now is, you know, almost the complete opposite, you know,
Yeah.
and like in relative proximity to access, to privilege, to the world in a very literal way.
I mean, I assume now you're in a lot of rooms where people are talking about, you know, like the problems that you faced growing up, but they've got no like understanding of it, and at least now you're in those rooms, which is cool.
Yeah, look, I feel like my license is expired, you know, like
But you've still got an understanding of like hardship of like some of the issues that, you know, of other people are facing. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure now your life's probably a bit better. Like,
sure,
you
sure,
know,
yeah,
but at the same time, like, you know, what I'm saying is like it's cool that like someone like you is in the position that you're in because you've got more perspective than a lot of the people who you're having conversations with now. Because I know like sometimes, you know, when I have to deal with people like in government or in arts and stuff like that, and I'm just like, do you have any fucking clue how the real world works? Like, do you have any understanding of what people actually need? Like, you know, and they just often don't. And
yeah,
like, so like, yeah, it's like at least the cool thing is for other people almost is that now someone is representing them, you know, like someone like you is representing them in a weird way in these conversations, in these boardrooms, behind the scenes. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
you don't feel that way.
no, I don't feel not entirely, Bob. I think I've come to be classified with the particular kind of blackness, I guess, you know.
Okay.
And just like we were talking about kind of pop culture, you know. Yeah, I mean there are positions that we can take because there's a bit of experience that you and I have, you know, because at some point we were young, and that's not, you know, it's not a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about like pop culture now, like we would step out and kind of cast that question to someone else, and
Yeah.
so
Okay.
even I feel like you know, there's a point at which we can romanticize difficulty
Yeah.
and poverty even,
Yeah.
you know, and I've come across a lot of people who kind of talk about poverty
It's an
because
abstract thing as well.
yeah, you know, because they're kind of like they can identify, they can theoretically they can identify and can articulate it sometimes, you know, at times better than people who actually experience that
Because
shit.
they
you
didn't
know?
have a job for 3 months, you know, so
You know, like they didn't
can
go to
relate.
you don't go to bed with no food because they want to diet. Yeah, you know what I mean? Not because, you know, there's nothing to eat.
Yeah.
You know? But like that reality,
But you also don't want to be that person.
yeah, I don't want to be that person because that reality is like a decade plus away from me now, you know.
Yeah.
There's someone else who's experiencing that shit right now, you know. And so if someone has to speak on that position, it cannot be me.
Okay.
It's someone else, you know. So I also think it's up.
But you see, you've got that perspective now, like, at least. So it's still valuable to have you there.
Right. I mean, I was talking to a colleague. It's interesting. I was talking to a colleague. Again, we kind of share the same upbringing, you know. And I'm very much interested in like in this generation of kids who are born of domestics.
I'm
You
also,
know?
like, weirdly fascinated by it. Like, just, yeah, like, because just growing up with a domestic worker, like, that was something that always, even when I was younger, like, felt strange to me. Because I was like, don't you have kids at home? Like, don't you, like, have a family that you're looking after and stuff as well? And, like, yeah, so, and just, because my mom didn't make a lot of money. So the fact that she could afford like a domestic worker once a week, like how much was that domestic worker making, you know, like,
Wow.
and how is that family surviving? And so like, I've definitely often wondered about like the long-term implications of that. But then at the
Yeah.
same time, it's also, weirdly enough, you know, a whole like class of women who's employed, who are financially enabled now, like
Sure.
in a weird way, but like have less access and less opportunities than white women had. So
Word,
it's
word.
like the dynamics of all of it are so fucked, because for some women it was better because they had independence from their husbands, from
Right.
men, from other things, but it was also now this reliance on middle class white people and rich white people
Sure.
to sustain. And but then, so for me, I grew up poor by white standards,
Yeah, sure.
and so I also had this poor boy thing to me, like growing up. I'm like, oh, I've got so little in comparison, and then I'm grow up now and I'm like, oh, you were so privileged, you fucking idiot, you had so fucking much.
Wow.
And so yeah, I do wonder what the experiences are of people who actually, so I thought I grew up poor, but then other people have grown up with way less and have overcome that and are achieving on a level that's unreal in a large way.
Word.
But at the same time, you don't want to romanticize poverty. You don't want to go,
Word.
oh, because these people, had tougher upbringings, that's why they're more, successful now. Because also not everyone achieves that success. Everyone goes through that struggle.
I think yeah.
Well, not
I'm
everyone,
with
but
you.
I'm talking about everyone within a class system. And
Sure. Yeah. I'm with you, man. I mean, I think for me, I think there's a returning trauma, to people kind of go through that. Later on, it kind of it returns to haunt them in some way. I was talking to someone else who also speaks, with an accent, and so in a debate, she was kind of classified as a very particular kind of person who comes from a particular background, etc. And she defied all of those classifications, and she was like, it's quite clear that I'm talking to people who think they can identify with the struggle, but the struggle is very theoretical in your minds, it's not lived. So I'm kind of very interested in those people who fall outside of these very generalized boxes,
Yeah.
and I think we were the first generation that experiments played out in such a huge scale.
And that are still affecting us.
Yeah,
to
word.
this
Yeah,
day.
sure.
Literally just townships are, bad social experiments.
Yeah.
Spatial planning. I mean, and that's the thing, design, someone who's so, design focused, how frustrated are you on the daily just with, the way everything is structured in this, city?
Take the taxi, man.
Yeah.
It's taxi are fucking frustrating, man. It's, yeah. I mean, yeah. There are a lot of there are a lot of critiques in the lack of design. I think we mostly
Lack of
have
planning.
engineering.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
We have engineering solutions for design problems.
This is also something you said years ago to me, basically. I remember, I think you brought it up in a talk. I think it was either at a TED talk or something, maybe. It was around the UAE, the architecture thing,
Right.
and it was just about the pathways, and about how people create their own
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
pathways. If you look throughout the city, there's
There's shortcuts,
Yeah.
straight lines
in
that defy the planner's routes.
Exactly, and that's kind of stuff that designers that's the thing, when you're thinking in terms of engineering, you're well, here's the thing, but as a designer, you have to actually go beyond that. You actually go, what's the usage and what's the long-term effects of this kind of stuff.
Word up.
And you really opened up my mind to that kind of thinking of design in that way, because I always thought of design, just in terms of graphics.
Word up. I mean, that's still a part of design.
Yeah, of
So-
course. But I never really thought of the you and a few other people have definitely changed my thinking in terms of that, in terms of how important design is in terms of society, in terms of long term planning.
And particularly, I think for me, the design is there to prove itself in an African or South African / Black context.
Yeah.
Because how does design respond to a dispossessed people? How does design afford value and create value? How design make manifest other means of wealth to people who don't have a material wealth, you know. How does design kind of improves someone's mood on an everyday at every touch point, you know.
That's obviously one of the biggest things.
Word.
Is just psychology of design. I mean, and like, I'm surprised more like Black Africans aren't depressed, like, and probably are, like, and just not expressing it, just because, like, fucking townships are not pretty places, man. Like,
Word.
people are wonderful and community's cool, but just looking at, like, you know, like, I've spent time in townships and, like,
Word.
yeah, man, it does. Like, I personally just, you know, from being even, like, you know, the space I grew up in wasn't amazing, but, you know, it was definitely a lot nicer. Like, you know,
Sure.
there was grass.
Yeah,
Like, you know, and so, yeah, like, the effects on, like, you know, Black psychology, I can imagine must be immense. You know, like, or what do you think? Like,
Sure. I mean, I think I'm interested in how design has been made by users, you know.
okay,
So it's to move away from the idea of it's to move away from a victim's position into a kind of subversive position.
so reinterpreting.
Creating, I think there are design solutions that people make for themselves in response to the engineer's solution.
Okay.
So this is to say that people are given something. They're given a product. They're given a service. So they are given an environment to inhabit.
Yeah, and they make what they will of it.
And they create a design solution to that, or a user's perception, position, and creation.
But at the same time, there are spaces that, so I know overseas, I'm trying to think, like, one of the podcasts I listened to was bringing it up. Just, you know, like, they try to create, like, a housing solution, essentially. But, so they created, like, these flats and stuff, and they were meant to be really, really nice, and, like, this and that.
The Netherlands?
No, it was in America, I think it was. Like, but the problem was, like, it was just not well designed. Like, they hadn't really thought about it well. And, you know, so people were living on top of each other. There were lots of areas where, like, parents couldn't see their kids playing and stuff like that. And so things started to degenerate as time went on. And, like, you know, like, so bad design can also negatively affect,
It does.
like, you know,
it
your life.
does.
Like, you know, you might grow up in a poorly, like, designed area that, you know, actually enables crime more.
Word.
It actually creates
sure.
a situation for these things.
Yeah.
And it's we're only now really, like, finding out, like, what the long-term effects of, like,
of those things
certain
are.
kinds of, just
Yeah.
literally the shape of your building. Man.
Word,
Like,
absolutely. I mean, so perhaps what I'm trying to get to at this point is, like, I think a lot of people can articulate the unfortunate consequences of a poorly designed space or environment.
Sure.
But I'm more interested in the detail that happens, like that moment where people inherit and subvert and kind of create their own language is a space that I'm interested in. Yeah.
So for you, it's just more about what positives can we get out of this?
Not even what positives. Like what's the phenomena? You know, what's the
reality?
I mean, it's also like it's a thing beyond the reality. You know, Arthur Jafford talks about it quite interestingly. He talks about black phenomena. You know, and like the phenomenology of space and of black culture, which in a way is to move beyond the good and the bad, and to look at what exists beyond that.
Sure.
You know. And I think a lot of that shit.
I think as an English person, I need to do that as well. It's just a lot more bad.
I mean, you know, and so for me, like, that space is much more interesting because I think it requires us to think and challenge ourselves, to look a bit deeper, to unpack the foundations, to unpack the mundane into something much more dynamic. You know, I think it's much easier to kind of draw very crude, basic deductions, or like this is the consequence of bad design, and these are the advantages of good design.
Okay,
you know?
fair enough. Yeah.
So what happens at that intersection is like the shits. You know.
This is why I think talking to you, man, because, like, yeah, like, I can bring you this thing that, like, I kind of know, and you go, nah, this is the way.
No, it's
You're not going, nah, this is the way it is, but you go like, nah, here's something different to think about. Here's different ways that, like, you know.
I'm thinking through these things, you know, and I'm not the first one. I think a lot of cats are doing this shit like really, really interesting ways.
Is that exciting to be a part of, like, almost like a movement?
Word. Yeah, I think it's exciting, man. It's
Because there are cats contributing to the cultural knowledge, like, worldwide, you know, like, from South Africa, like, you know, like, obviously there's the like, you know, there's the different implications of all of it, you know, from just the, you know, small tribal side, you know, to being Black, African, and then the global scale of it all, you know, like, so the localized stuff is so important, and it's so missed on the global scale a lot of the times. And like, do you find now the cool thing with your work, because you get to travel a bit more, you get to present a bit more and stuff, are you finding that you're able to share, you know, local ideas like internationally a lot more? Like, are you finding people are receptive to it? Or
I mean, Bob, if I were to be honest, man, I think I'm talking to people like myself, man, you know.
is it?
Yeah, bruh. I'm talking with people like myself, people who look like me, people who are obsessed with the same ideas as me.
So they already know this stuff, or you're still able to share, like.
No, I think it's actually it's surprising, or at least it was surprising to realize how like, because of South Africa's makeup, people are exposed to different things. It's like how people in Durban understand Kwaito is very different to how people in Johannesburg
Oh yes.
understand Kwaito, Gom,
Yeah, 100%.
Zulu culture, Sotho culture, etc., etc. So there's a conversation I'm trying to create that's intergenerational, that cuts across cultural, traditional, so-called tribal classifications, you know. And if it so happens that that process, my work, is financed or is supported or enabled by international platforms, if you will, or national platforms or continental platforms. But essentially, I think I'm talking to those people. I'm always trying to create a conversation with those people. So it matters less whether my work or those ideas are received or how they're received internationally, as long as I can contribute to something locally. Is for me, it's that's the preoccupation. That's
So you're not concerned. That's awesome, because I was wondering like if the global conversation is necessarily like a concern for you, and like because like you're talking about it as like, you know, the Black experience, and like, you know, Blackness is something that you care immensely about, but those things are different worldwide, aren't they? Like, you know, and like different even from South Africa to Nigeria, even from, like you were saying, you know, Kwaito is different in Joburg than it is in Durban. And so for you, do you find that the localized work is actually where it just matters the most for you? Because I guess it's where you can have the most impact, and you can, you know, like also speak more accurately, I guess, or have more of a accurate impact, like, because like like, you know, trying to speak about Blackness for Joburg, you know, Black people, or for, you know, Black person in New Orleans, like obviously there's some problems there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think the local stuff is also like trying to understand my origins and my provenance, if you will. So and I don't think one can successfully present that in a neat way, because I don't think culture is assembled that way. Culture is messy, you know, and so much of it has
History
to do.
books won't let you know that, but
No, they won't. You know, they like prefer a rather clean and clinical perspective on culture. But it's I think I fumble. I think I fumble most times. You know, I fail most times.
You're still young.
Yeah, but some failures are detrimental, you know. They're costly. I reckon. Yeah.
How so?
Just like.
Like, has anything you've done had a negative impact on like other people?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. I mean, I don't think I've suffered like a major failure or have done something which has had like immense consequences, you know. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm pushing hard enough, if that hasn't happened yet. You know what I mean? Like I think we should approach the subject matter with the level of courage,
Yeah.
you know, and respect. And so, where does the one end, and when does the other start?
Yeah, because it's also like some of what you do obviously would have like implications in people's real lives.
Word,
And
yeah.
So, yeah, you want to be courageous with that, but you also don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
Because
Word.
the long-term effects,
yeah.
are very real. So does that? So it clearly does plague your mind a lot.
Yeah, it does. It does. Hell yeah. But you know, at the same time, someone said to me, he said, "Oh man, don't refer to me as a Zimbabwean, and don't refer to me as black. I'm much more complicated than that shit."
Yeah.
You know. And of course they identify as black first and foremost. But I think what it was getting to is like to be all of those classifications does not define my extent. The extent of my existence.
You can be all these things and more.
I think it starts to define who you are.
Oh,
it doesn't conclude who you are. You know?
Yeah. You can be more.
Well, is it about being more?
Or,
I don't know if it's about being more, and I don't know if there is the word.
Or
for
it's
it.
you are more, like Dan just
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps, you know.
But
And for
more,
me,
more
that's-
might not be the right word, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and like for me, like all of these things that like we don't have the accurate words and definition vocabularies for are super interesting to obsess over, you know. I was watching a Miles Davis documentary, and how he was just like, for me, he just defied a lot of the shit that was going on at the time, you know, like just like pushing so far and beyond the discourse at the time, you know, and I think he had like a lot of backlash from people and from his peers and people he was around at that time. But these are people who really pushed the margins.
Yeah, I mean, Miles Davis also, you know, like shot people and like, you know.
Yeah, it was a handful.
And like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, so he
of course.
definitely like had like a streak to him that was like, whoo.
Yeah.
I would not want to like, yeah, like he pushed like in a lot of different ways. Like,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
Like, do you think society even has space for someone like that anymore?
I think we're filled with people like that.
Okay,
I mean, not the genius.
I mean, popular society, like, you know, like obviously, people like that exist like before they get famous. Like, you know, there's like, you know, people who think like that and exist like that. But like, once someone, you know, gets famous and popular now, like you can't really push boundaries or wild outs. I mean, look at Kanye. Like, look at like, you know, his new thing. Like, you know, while totally not on board with the Jesus is King thing. Like, I'm like,
Jesus is King?
Yeah, he's releasing a new album called Jesus
Oh,
is
right,
King, I think.
okay. Yeah, so I saw that, yes.
Yeah. Like,
Why aren't you down with that? Sorry to cut you.
just not for me at all. Like, I'm not religious in any way. Like, I'm actually anti, like...
Well, you
know.
think that's his vibe? Like, you think his position, like, he's kind of looking at white Jesus as...
No, I don't think white Jesus necessarily, but like, I just think the whole thing is very culty. Like, what he's doing, like, is very much cult personality shit. Like, that he's creating around himself whilst also maybe having some religious delusions. But, like,
okay.
maybe, like...
Sorry, I didn't take it that... Okay, fair enough.
I'm taking it hella seriously, man. Like, because Kanye also does have mental, like, issues.
Sure.
Like, you know, and I worry how much, like, you know, I worry about his mental health a little bit, but that's also for him to worry about. You know, but like, yeah, definitely the Jesus is King thing, like, is strange as fuck to me. Just the whole Sunday church service and stuff, because it's like, I've read some L. Ron Hubbard, man, like, you know, I've seen Scientology,
Sure.
like, these culty things, like, just in general, like, Jared Leto's even got, like, his own little, like, weird cult thing going on, and I'm just like, no, like, these famous people like need to just chill.
Interesting.
But like I was saying though, but like someone like Kanye is a prime example, almost like of like a Miles Davis type in modern day society. Like
I
someone who
see.
is constantly fighting against the media, against his place in it,
Sure.
against even musically he's always pushing boundaries like as far as he can and
Word.
yeah. So but look at how much backlash he gets. Look at how much Kanye just gets, even from someone like me. Absolutely. So I imagine if someone like Miles Davis existed now, like he would probably
Interesting.
catch a lot of heat.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think he would catch as much heat as he should. I think society today is very punishing at that moment, but very forgiving in the long run.
Yeah, it's weird like how it's this public basically you get your 60 lashes, whatever many it is, in public, on social media.
Word,
you apologize for your thing, and
Like,
everyone's
go out and run wild again.
just look in South Africa, like recently, that's essentially what happened with the whole Me Too movement and people sharing their stories on Twitter, and then lots of names, lots of famous
totally.
names,
Yeah, word.
and they're all still being booked. So I guess my thing of maybe Miles Davis's career would probably be fine in 2019.
Yeah. Look, and I also I think you should take all of it as a package. I reckon. Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a hard one to discuss. I think he'd be okay. I think he'd be okay. I think
Chris
society
Brown's
would.
okay,
And many other problematic figures are okay.
100%. I wasn't expecting a conversation.
I mean, the Kanye thing very quickly. I don't think of him kind of creating some kind of cult around him. I really thought that the Jesus is King thing is an extension of him, of Jesus, in a way.
But
conceptually.
Maybe, but you see, Jesus was I am God, whereas he now seems to be on that praise, I'm no longer God thing. Actually, let's just praise the Most High. Let's praise Jesus. I'm not God anymore, or I never was. I don't know, but I need to listen to it. I need to see it because the last album was gospel, the Life of Pablo.
Okay.
And that there, I didn't listen to it that much, so I can't even remember it lyrically. But Jesus was weirdly blasphemous.
Yeah, I still find it difficult, man. How hip hop is yet to account for all the fucking the problematic language and references
And the fact
and
that
how men can how men can so call and use words like be and age. It's just I don't know, man. I find it strange how and why we're still so forgiving to these cats. And it's 2019, bruh.
Yeah, see, it's a weird one because it is a thing that's a thing that's now excused as it's cultural. It's
Word.
and even women call each other bitches and hoes. I'll use the words, but you listen to Nicki Minaj, you listen
Sure.
to, it's such a big part, and so you do have that, people saying, oh no, it's taking the power back, it's it's a term of endearment and this and that in lots of different ways. But I agree with you in that the words we use have an effect on our psychology, on how we view people, on the reason why on toxic masculinity, on the reason why men are as misogynistic as they can be is largely due to culture. It is largely due to the movies we watch, the songs we listen to, and so that's the thing. It's weird, as I'm growing up, I ponder, how much does an artist actually have responsibility to the audience? Do you have any, or do you have all of it? Do you have none?
Tricky.
And it's weird because you know, as a member of the public, I'm like, well, yes, the artist, you know, should think about the implications and blah blah blah. But like as an artist, I'm like, well, just create the art that's, you know, is true to you, like, and whatever the implications of that are the implications of it. Because you know how society reacts to your art is also as much on society as it is on you.
Yeah, word. Yeah, valid points.
Like, you know, because obviously that's what society wants. That's how society already is, and you're just expressing. Because that is the thing with hip hop, is that like for a large period of time it was expressing people's realities.
Word. Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
And then it became very much fiction. But you know, for a brief period of time, like, you know, it was people expressing their realities, and it was just re-expressing the culture around them. So, you know, people were calling women bitches and hoes because that's what they heard on the streets.
Sure.
But then that does now become a global culture.
Sure.
Through like the way, you know, things have unfolded.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that wouldn't have necessarily taken hold if things weren't inherently misogynistic.
Yeah.
If society wasn't already like that,
sure.
that kind of hip hop wouldn't appeal so much.
Yeah, but you also hope that, like, since these cats are the thinkers of today, they can somehow try to reverse that.
I don't know, man. Like, maybe Mos Def, but definitely not Fetty.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And unfortunately, society listens to way more Fetty than Mos
Yeah,
Def.
sure, exactly.
So,
I can settle the score there, you know.
Although I do still love many men. That is my if someone like tweets something at me, or someone like gives me some shit on the internet, it's just like 50 Cent, many man.
Trying to about. I can't even get the words, man. It's so long ago. Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that brings us to the end there. This has been a really, really cool chat, and I'm so stoked with you for sharing your time. And you know, like, I get to know a little bit more about you. We've had so many like hour long conversations, even longer than this, like, about so many topics, and like I'm so glad that people get to just get a little understanding of who you are, and even me, like, get to know more about you, and you know, a bit more of your upbringing and stuff. And I just want to thank you for, like, you know, your cultural contributions to Durban, and for doing the admin work and the stuff behind the scenes that a lot of people, you know, just wouldn't ever know exists. Right. So shout outs to you, man.
I'll throw that back at you, man. Thank you for doing all that you do for Durban.
But I'll make sure people know about it.
Yeah, I'll try to step up my game where that is concerned, you know. But yeah, you've done a lot, man, and you keep going despite all the difficulties and challenges that Durban throws at you. So, like,
for now,
mad respect.
I might deal with the challenges of another suit.
Well, do what you gotta do to survive, homie.
Might be better designed.
What? You'll be good, man. You'll be good. Peace, though.
Later, homie.
Yeah.